going to spend just a couple of minutes comparing fractions that have the same numerator. So I'm going to go ahead and first thing I want to do is I want to look at the denominator and I want to see how many parts my shape is divided into. So when I look at these, again, the same as when I have the same denominator, I want to choose the same shape to divide. But since this fraction had a denominator of 3, I'm only going to divide that shape into 3 parts. This fraction, has a 4 in the denominator, so I'm going to go ahead and divide that shape into 4 parts. I colored 2 of the 3 parts in on this fraction and 2 of the 4 parts in on the second fraction. If I think about 2/4, that shows me a half. I know that 2/4 and 1/2 are equivalent. So I just went ahead and drew kind of a dotted line to show where a half would be represented. And I can see that a half is colored in on this circle, but there's even more than a half colored in. So I know that since 2/3 is more than a half, it's closer to 1/2. So 2/3 has to be the greater fraction because it is closer to 1/2. When I come down to the bottom, perhaps I don't want to draw a picture, but I want to think about the size of the pieces and what represents 1/2. So I take a look here and I have 1/6. Then my denominator tells me that my pieces, or my shape, is going to be divided into 6 pieces that are of equal size. So I want to think about what fraction would represent 1/2. Well, 6/6 equals 1/2. I'm going to come over here and do the same thing for 1/4. If I want to come up with a fraction that equals 1, I know that 4 equal size pieces out of 4 would represent 1/2. So now I can take a look and I have a 6 and a 4. And I know that 6/6 equals 1/2 and 4/4 equals 1/2. This is often where students rely on their previous knowledge that 6 is greater than 4. But we want to think about fractions are less than 1, and so a fraction piece is less than 1/2. And I want to think about the size of the piece. Well, if it only takes 4 pieces to equal 1/2, as opposed to 6 pieces to equal 1/2, or 6/6 to equal 1/2, then the size of the fourths must be larger. So I want to think about when I have the same numerator, if I think about the size of the pieces, the smaller the denominator, the larger the piece. So if I were to think 1/6 then 1/4, both colored in, 1/4 is going to have to be the larger fraction because, again, down here, I know that 4/4 is 1/2. And if I have one of those colored in as opposed to one of the 6 colored in, I'm going to be showing a fraction in a picture or thinking about it in my mind that is closer to 1/2 because I know when I'm working with fractions that have the same numerator but a different denominator, the smaller the denominator, the larger the piece. So I'm able to answer this comparison question, which is larger? Well, 1/4. And I put in my comparison symbol. 1/6 is less than 1/4. And if I have to explain that, again, I go back to the size of the piece. The smaller the denominator, the larger the piece. 1/4 is closer to 1/2 than 1/6.